everybody, hello. Today we'll be discussing hexapods, which is basically going to have us discussing insects. Apologize in advance. Insects is a really big topic here, so it's going to be a little while as we go through our notes today. I like starting off with this picture because it's kind of hard to see the insect, and I think it does a very good job showing some of the unique traits that insects have, right? Some of these specialized systems that allow them to become such a unique group of animals, right? If you can't tell, there's a specific type of praying mantis called an orchid mantis that hides in the flower waiting for prey here. Insects actually make up the majority of all animal life on Earth. So I'm going to take you through some of the basics, and then we'll get into a bunch of stuff on different types of insects. All members of the subphylum Hexapod have 6 legs, and each of their bodies have 3 tagmata, which are sections or segments of their body. That includes the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And if we're talking about appendages are always attached to either the head or the thorax. And the main class we're talking about within hexapods, which stands for 6 legs, is Insecta, which are the insects. Class Insecta includes the most diverse and abundant species of animals worldwide. We know of at least 1.1 million different species of insects, but there could be up to 30 million different species worldwide. Some of the traits that they have that allow them to succeed and dominate the earth, here's just a few of them. Flight and a small size. If you've ever tried to kill a fly, catch a little flying insect, it's really hard. That fast speed, flight, and small size makes them hard to kill. They generally have well-protected eggs, which can withstand rigorous conditions. They have structural modifications on their wings or legs and antennae and mouth that allow for adaptation. And then, of course, because they're arthropods, they have a hard protective exoskeleton that's well adapted for regions where life isn't always easy, like a desert. There are many, many different variations in body forms. I'm just going to take you through each different tagmata here and show you a couple different modifications. So on the head, there's generally large compound eyes, a pair of antennae, which are used for touch, taste, and hearing, and then mouth parts, right? And the mouth parts consist of either mandibles or maxillae, and then a tongue-like appendage, which generally determines how it feeds. Here's a couple examples of antennae. We can see some different antennae here, and then all of these pictures here. Same here with the tree hoppers and cicadas. All different types of antennae. We also see a couple different mouth parts here, so I'll take you through each one. We already know A, which is the chewing mouth part. Like we see on a grasshopper, that is just a mandible. But you can also see B, which is on the mosquito, which is a sucking mouth part, which pierces and sucks up liquid. D is also a sucking mouth part, but they don't have a mandible. Instead, they form what's called a proboscis here. This generally you see in butterflies. And then E, like we see in flies, is called a sponging mouth part, which laps up liquid and helps to liquefy food. Other parts of their body, right? We just went through the head, we have the thorax and the abdomen. The thorax generally consists of 3 parts, and on each part of the thorax there is a pair of legs, and those legs can be modified to fit whatever the insect needs. Wings are also located on the thorax, and generally wings are an outgrowth of the cuticle or the exoskeleton. There are veins, which are the little lines on the wings. And if you ever want to get into in your life naming and classifying insects, oftentimes they use the vein pattern to identify the different taxa of insects. Most insects have 2 pairs of wings for a total of 4, except for order Diptera, which are true flies, which only have 1 pair, or non-reproductive ants and termites, which are generally wingless. And we can see here, here's the head, thorax, and abdomen on the back here. The wings and legs here are attached to the thorax. Head has the antennae and the eyes and the mouth parts, and then the abdomen doesn't have any parts here. Showing you just a couple cool pictures. This is a scanning electron microscope image of an insect leg. You can see all these little hairs, which are used for tactile senses, so they can see things moving around them. So if you've ever wondered why it's so hard to catch a fly, these little hairs detect air currents. And so as your big old hand comes and tries to swat a fly, the fly can detect changes in the air current because of these little hairs on their legs, and then that'll cause them to move out of the way. Here's a moth wing here and an insect wing, where you can see the little veins here, and they can use the vein patterns to help determine what kind of insect it is. I'm showing you some cool modifications here. This is a giant horned beetle, which has a process from its head that it uses to lift competition usually up and move them out of the way for resources. This is a walking stick bug. Usually their modification is looking like a stick, which is pretty good camouflage from predators. This here is a female wasp. Right now, what she's doing in the picture, this is her abdomen here, and attached to her abdomen is this little thing which might be hard for you to see here, but it's going down from her body into the wood called an ovipositor, and she's using her abdomen and thrusting that ovipositor as deep as she can into this wood over time, and that's where she'll deposit her larvae to keep them safe. I'm going to put a video of this up a little bit later. Some other cool modifications is the water strider, which spreads out its weight to be supported by the surface tension of water. This is a common housefly, which only has one set of wings here. But on this common housefly, you can see oftentimes over 100 different pathogens on its body, which is usually what makes them gross and dangerous. Not that they poop or vomit every time they land. That's a common myth, but they do carry pathogens like bacteria and viruses with them. All right, so one of the key survival mechanisms for insects is flight. So it makes sense that we talk about their flight muscles. They have what are called direct and indirect flight muscles. Direct flight muscles attach directly to the wings, and they control the up and down movement of the wings. And indirect flight muscles alter the shape of the thorax, which can cause the wing to move, but it doesn't move the wing directly because it's attached to it. Instead, it's attached to the thorax, and by moving the thorax, it can move the wing. And so insects can either have one or the other, or both, depending on what type of insect we're talking about here. And the wing speed for insects can vary significantly based on the size of the wings, the size of the insect, and generally where they're located. Like butterflies only beat their wings about 4 times a second, while midges, which is a very small fly, can beat its wing 1,000 times a second. All right, now we're going to go through internal anatomy, talking about stuff that you'd find in the abdomen, like the digestive system. The digestive system is split up into 3 different parts. The foregut, which is made up of the salivary glands, the esophagus, crop, and gizzard. That's basically where food enters the insect's body and is stored until it starts to get digested. The midgut is the primary site for digestion and absorption of materials, similar to the small intestine in your body. And then finally, the hindgut is similar to the large intestine in your body. You don't know the large intestine is the primary site for water reabsorption in the body. And we can just see here's the mouth, which leads to the esophagus, which then leads to the crop and gizzard underneath. That's all foregut, and then we get to the midgut, which is where digestion and absorption happens, and then the hindgut over here. So within insects, we basically see all types of feeding mechanisms, but actually a large chunk of them are herbivores, feeding on plant tissues or juices. We even have specialized animals like caterpillars, which can be specialized to eat only one or two species of plants. But then we have other insects like beetles or certain insect larvae, which eat dead animals or dead organisms. And some are predaceous, like praying mantises, and they're carnivores. We also have parasitic ones, like the common flea, or the guinea pig lice, or the human lice. Ladybugs are common carnivores. They feed on aphids. We can see it feeding on a little aphid right here. Um, I wanted to stop to show this picture. This is a hornworm, which is it's kind of like a moth here. This is the larval stage of the moth. But what you see coming out of this is actually tiny parasitic larvae of a hornet. And so what they do is the hornet goes and injects its eggs into the body of this hornworm. And then the eggs develop inside of this organism and then sprout out when they're ready to hatch. Pretty interesting. I actually have a video of this that we'll watch on a different day. Some other internal parts. The circulatory system is open where they move hemolymph instead of blood. There's gas exchange through these tracheal systems, which are little tubes in the side of their body that branch into the body, which provide with oxygen. They also have spiracles, which open to the tracheal trunks, and valves on the spiracles, which can help reduce water loss and serve as a dust filter. And you can see some of those here, right? So here's a little valve to keep things from coming in. This is the outside of its body. There's a little protective layer to keep little dust particles from coming in. But then this tracheal system, basically think of it as your trachea, which leads into your lungs, leads directly instead of lungs to blood vessels. So basically transfers oxygen into their blood vessels directly. They have a bunch of different sense organs, so just a couple here. A mechanoreceptor are like those small little hairs that are distributed all over their body, antennae and legs. They have auditory receptors, which can detect airborne sounds. Anytime you see this prefix TYMP, that usually has to do with ears or hearing. So we'll see like temporal membranes. This is a tympanal organ. Same thing. It has to do with hearing. And then chemoreception, right? Some insects can detect pheromones from several kilometers away. That's how strong their chemoreception is. And then visual reception, that's pretty obvious. There are two types of eyes we see. There are simple eyes, which just sense light and dark, and there are more complex eyes, which are the compound eyes, which sense images. Most of the time, the larval stages have simple eyes, while the adults have compound eyes. And some insects can see color, some can see things that we can't even see, like UV light. Here we can see generally how the insect eye looks. I like to look at this picture here. Some of the benefits are really, really large field of view. And you can notice changes in that field of view generally faster, like it's hard to swat a fly, right? But the disadvantage is it's hard to focus with this compound eye. We can see the dragonfly lens here, and you can even see the little hexagon shapes in there. It's pretty cool. Reproduction in insects, we basically see all different types. There's parthenogenesis, which happens in true bugs, ants, wasps, and bees. There's sexual reproduction, which is generally the norm in most insects, where there are separate sexes. Pheromones are used to attract mates, but sometimes you have these complex mating rituals like fireflies, which use their flashing lights to detect mates. Some use sound, color signals, and all other courtship behaviors. I'll show you this damselfly reproduction video a different day as well, but you can see I like that their body forms this heart shape here as kind of a mating ritual. So fertilization is internal through spermatophores. The females, there's a few different ways that they mate. They can either mate every season, or sometimes a female will mate just once throughout her life, store sperm in her body so that she can just fertilize eggs continuously with that one stored sperm throughout her whole lifetime. There are some males who have evolved the ability to remove another male's sperm and insert their own. Damselflies and dragonflies are some of the ones that have that. And there are other males who have evolved a defense to that, which then what their defense is they produce a little plug that can prevent fertilization from other males. Here's some examples of insect eggs. These are mosquito eggs, which kind of are laid together to form a raft that live on the water. And there's what the larvae looks like when it comes out, swims in the water. Most insects, after they hatch, change form. They go through this metamorphosis process or change. And when they grow, they often molt, which is when they shed their exoskeleton, grow a little bit, and then form a new exoskeleton. And each stage in between molt is called an instar. And then generally, most insects develop their wings during that last stage of development. We can see here's a cicada, which forms its wings, which we see here. After its last molt, we can see it molting here, so it's connected to a tree, pulling itself out of its old exoskeleton here. And cicadas are pretty interesting. They can stay as their larval form in the ground for years, just feeding on the roots, staying underground, and then once they come out, they mate, oftentimes for a couple days, making really, really loud noises that can be heard from miles away. And then once the mating process is over, oftentimes they die, and then they lay their larvae underground. Larvae stay for years, and that's their life cycle. This is a stonefly and a damselfly. They both have aquatic larvae, and so they live their life out on land, but their larvae live underwater. Two words I'm going to throw at you are complete and incomplete metamorphosis. Incomplete metamorphosis is what you see in things like grasshoppers, cicadas, mantids, true bugs, flies, and so on, where basically the adult just looks like a larger version of the young. Right, so they still have an egg, but then here's the larvae, and at each stage, basically, it's just getting bigger. And maybe the only difference is that they acquire wings in their last phase. That's different from complete metamorphosis, which is present in about 88% of all insects, where the larvae, the pupa, which is the middle stage, and the adult all vary in body plan. Oftentimes, they also live in completely different environments, so that there's no competition amongst the different stages here. Sometimes there's several larval instars, which are the little in-between phases. But generally, the easiest example to remember this, the larvae, the pupa, and the adult, are what happens with caterpillar turning into a butterfly, right? The caterpillar is the larvae stage, the pupa is the cocoon, and then the adult is the butterfly. And they all inhabit completely different ecosystems and eat different things. And we can see that here. So the egg turns into caterpillar, it eats leaves, turns into its chrysalis here, which is the pupa, and then you get the butterfly. Some more vocab words to throw at you. There's this word called diapause, which is basically a period of dormancy where the animal doesn't do anything for a certain part of the year. We most commonly know hibernation, which is winter dormancy, when things are very dormant or don't do anything during the winter time because of extreme cold. But there can also be summer dormancy, usually because of really high heat and hard conditions to find water, which is called estivation. And generally, winter dormancy, hibernation, and estivation um, are in are ways to survive adverse conditions. All right. So defense. Some examples of defense in insects. Right. You can have protective coloration, basically warning colors where it says, "Hey, don't eat me. I'm this bright color. I taste really bad. I'm probably bad for you to eat. I might be poisonous. Don't eat me." And then there's also mimicry, which is other animals that are similar, trying to copy animals that have that protective coloration. Stink bugs and others have repulsive odors and tastes. Some insects are aggressive, like bees and ants and wasps. The monarch caterpillar incorporates a poison substance into its food, the milkweed, so that it tastes bad and is sometimes toxic to things that eat it. And then you have the bombarder beetle, which is down here, which is a beetle that can spray its enemies with an irritating chemical that can burn it. Here's an example of mimicry. This is the monarch butterfly, which is pretty distasteful. Sometimes it can be a little toxic to animals. And then this is the viceroy butterfly, which looks pretty darn similar, but there's nothing distasteful about this butterfly. But it's a survival mechanism to look like this butterfly, which a lot of organisms don't like to eat. Crypsis is camouflage, and we can see a few different examples here. Here's a moth that resembles a dead leaf. Here's a tree hopper that looks like a tree branch, and here's a katydid that looks like a pile of leaves. Right, you can barely even see this one, honestly. So you can't talk about insects without talking about pheromones. Pheromones are chemicals that are secreted by one individual that affects the behavior of another individual. Oftentimes, pheromones are released to attract the opposite sex, but sometimes they also trigger aggression, can fend off aggression, or can mark a trail to something. Bees, wasps, and ants can recognize pheromones from their own nest mates, and they can be used to alarm if strangers enter the nest. And then sound production and reception. We've all heard insects in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's used as a warning device to tell that something's coming. Sometimes it's an advertisement of that insect's territory, or sometimes it can be a courtship ritual. All right, one of the most interesting insects are honeybees. Today's lab activity is going to be about bees. Generally, there are 60 to 70,000 bees per hive, if we're talking about fully mature hives. There's generally just a few male drones, one fertile queen, and a whole bunch of female workers. The drones, their main job is to just mate with the queen. And they develop by parthenogenesis, which is when the queen just releases an egg, no male comes along to fertilize it, and that unfertilized egg develops into a male drone. But fertilized eggs develop into female worker bees. But you can have a female bee actually develop into a fertile queen if that female bee is fed royal jelly for 6 days or more. And royal jelly is a very, very special type of honey that changes the actual body chemistry of that bee to turn from a worker bee who is infertile to a fertile queen bee. Pretty interesting. And then the queen, what she does is she secretes what's called the queen pheromone. to prevent the worker bees from maturing, um, or to prevent feeding larvae the royal jelly so no other queens get made. The worker bees can have different roles from scouts, construction of the comb, feeding the queen, feeding the drones, guarding, cleaning, and so on. Here we can see the queen bee. She looks generally different than all of the rest of them. She's surrounded by her court, so all these other bees are protecting her, doing jobs for her. Um, the queen, her only job is to just lay eggs pretty continuously, and others are attracted to her by pheromones. Well, they'll even lick her body and transfer pheromones to other bees. And so the queen is determined by the larvae that are fed royal jelly. And sometimes it can be more than one larvae that are fed that royal jelly. And so what happens then is the larvae fight until there's only one queen that remains. Then the queen leaves the hive, mates up with up to 12 different drone males for one night, and then returns to the colony, uses the collected sperm throughout her whole lifetime to make more eggs. And oftentimes a queen, if conditions are right, can be the queen for several years. And this royal jelly is made by a special gland in one of the female worker bees called the nurse bee. The queen bee differs from the rest of the bees because she can actually sting multiple times because her sting is not barbed, and therefore it's not removed from her body when she stings. And then from egg to mating adult is about 20 days. And here's a comb with royal jelly in it and larvae inside of it. Pretty interesting. But another thing to talk about when we talk about bees is also to talk about wasps. Wasps, the simplest way to put it, are evil. I call them a-hole bees. Here's a few differences, right? So a wasp has a pretty narrow waist, as we can see here. It's pinched off, while bees have a more broad waist. Wasps are predators, while bees are not. They feed on nectar and honey. A wasp makes more of a papery nest, which is from like saliva and chewed plant material that they construct their nest out of, while we have the honeycomb nests that are in trees. And then the biggest difference is that bees' stings are barbed, which means as they sting somebody, the stinger stays in the skin of what they sting. And it's connected to their digestive system. So when they sting and fly away, their digestive system gets ripped out of their body, while a wasp's sting is not barbed. It can be removed, but generally it's ejected by that wasp. And it can sting several times. Oftentimes there's a poisonous liquid that is dispelled with the sting. Some common names like hornets and yellow jackets are all just different types of wasps. Generally, a hornet is like a really large wasp. A yellow jacket is just a specific species of wasp. Another interesting group of insects are termites. Termites also have a queen, just like bees. The workers for termites are wingless, and they're constantly feeding on the wood and foraging, storing food, building the nest up. The queen, just like with the bees, continuously lays eggs throughout her lifetime. And her extended abdomen, so this larger area of her body here, is just full of ovaries. It can fly, generally to mate, and sometimes queens also have kings. Couple other ones. Ant colonies, very, very interesting. If you're ever looking for like a YouTube deep dive, if you just look up like ants on YouTube, there's some crazy things that come up. And I'm going to show one video later about ant wars, because ants are one of the only other groups of animals besides humans that can rage full-out wars. So in an ant colony, the male ant dies after mating, and the female ant does a lot of the work. Um, Ants have wingless soldiers and workers. They've also developed striking economic behaviors. Ants can do things like make slaves out of other insects. They've been known to farm fungi. They've been known to sew nests together, use tools, herd different animals. It's insane some of the things that ants can do. Fire ants, that's a common one that people know of often. They bite with their mandibles and hold on to their prey. Uh, they have an unbarbed sting where they inject venom, and the venom is generally very painful. That's why they're called fire ants. Here's an ant feeding on aphids. We see here. Most generally are predators or scavengers, but there are some that feed on fungi that they cultivate and grow in their own nests. Those are called leafcutter ants. All right, so we've talked about some of the interesting ones. Now let's talk about let's end with beneficial and harmful insects. So we do have beneficial insects. Think of bees, right? They make honey and beeswax. You have silkworms, which make silk. If we're talking like big picture, bees and other insects can pollinate crops. Bees can pollinate up to $10 billion worth of food crops in just the United States annually. Fly maggots generally consume dead organisms, returning nutrients back to an ecosystem. And they're very, very critical parts of food chains. Many bigger animals like fishes and amphibians and birds all rely on insects as their main food source. Here's some examples. Here's a stink bug feeding on a caterpillar. Caterpillars can be pests, so a stink bug is beneficial. Ladybugs feed on aphids, which are generally pests too. And then here's a parasitic wasp eating crickets. And crickets, if you didn't know, crickets can turn into locusts. Basically, when there's too many crickets in one area, they all get really annoyed with each other and turn into locusts and then just go ham on basically all the crops around them and just start eating everything because they were so overcrowded. There are harmful insects too that destroy plants and fruits. They're very big crop pests, and substantial money is lost each year to insects, and a lot of money is invested in trying to find more efficient ways to get rid of insects to control insect growth in crops. They can also destroy food, clothing, and property. Here's the Japanese beetle, which feeds on different fruits and flowers. Mealybug, which can ruin crops. Here's a corn earworm. We see up here, ruins a corn crop. But I think the biggest one that we need to discuss is to discuss mosquitoes. Medically important insects include all insects who are disease vectors. Mosquitoes can carry malaria, West Nile virus, filio worms, if you remember those from our roundworm discussion. They are the most common vector for diseases worldwide. But you also have other things like fleas, which can carry the plague, which is a bacteria. The tsetse fly, which can carry a protozoan known as the African sleeping sickness. Or lice, which in the worst case can carry typhus fever, besides making you itch really bad. Here's the mosquito here, male, female. And then just ending with a few examples of the different orders here. So order Odonta, those are dragonflies. Hemiptera, those are ants. Diptera, we can see the mosquitoes here. Yeah, that's about it.